debated asking the cabinet to declare the president unfit for office. Plus, Vice President Pence publicly rebukes 3 key American allies, accusing France, Germany, and the United Kingdom of being soft on Iran. And the deal is printed. The big votes in the hours ahead. The Senate first, the House this evening, and then the government spending bill that gives the president very little money for his border wall heads to the Oval Office. Those hoping the president will sign it are asking for help.
We'll see what happens. I signed it last night. A lot of us did. The report. We've got to pass it. And then we all pray that the president will sign it.
Let's all pray that the president will have wisdom to sign the bill so government doesn't shut down.
Not every day you get prayers like that in the United States Senate, but we begin with a dramatic account of top FBI and Justice Department officials debating, get this, whether they could have President Trump declared unfit for office. And we also begin with this important reminder. 2 of the key players in this drama have major credibility issues. One is Andrew McCabe, the former number 2 at the FBI. He was fired last year, and the Department of Justice Inspector General wrote a scathing report questioning his truthfulness. The other is President Trump, whose casual relationship with the truth is beyond well documented. McCabe's new book is about to hit the shelves, and he's on 60 Minutes this Sunday. In a clip of the interview released today, McCabe talks of his worry after the president fired his boss, James Comey. McCabe says he returned from a May 2017 meeting with the president so disturbed, he says he ordered his agents to expand their investigation of Russian election meddling to include the question of whether the Comey firing was an Oval Office attempt to obstruct justice.
I was very concerned that I was able to put the Russia case on absolutely solid ground in an indelible fashion, that were I removed quickly or reassigned or fired, that the case could not be closed or vanish in the night without a trace.
Correspondent Scott Pelley says in portions of the interview not yet aired that McCabe also confirms a story first reported by the New York Times last year, that senior officials, including McCabe and the Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, debated whether the president was acting on Russia's behalf and discussed whether there were grounds to ask the cabinet to invoke the 25th Amendment and remove the President of the United States from office. The president lashed out on Twitter and, as he almost always does, twisted some facts as he vented his anger. Disgraced was the label the president gives McCabe, accusing him of protecting Hillary Clinton from tough scrutiny and then of political motivations in the Russia investigation. McCabe is a disgrace to the FBI and a disgrace to our country, the president tweets. McCabe says he has contemporaneous notes and other memos that he insists support his account, and we do know that Special Counsel Robert Mueller has those materials. CNN's Laura Jarrett joins us from the Justice Department. Laura, just when you go through this, top Justice Department officials in room saying, should we try to get the president removed from office? Wow.
It's a stunning account, truly extraordinary, John. And it's interesting, McCabe is not just painting turmoil in general, but he's also really getting to the heart of the matter and how the firing of FBI James Comey really triggered a sea change at the FBI, and officials were worried about President Trump's motivations, namely whether he was working on behest of Russia, as we have previously reported. But McCabe has done more. He's also gone a step further, describing, apparently to Scott Pelley, his discussions with the Deputy Attorney General, Rod Rosenstein, who's been overseeing the special counsel's Russia investigation, namely the fact that he says Rosenstein raised the idea of wearing a wire to record the president. And also they've discussed potentially recruiting cabinet members to invoke the 25th Amendment to remove the president from office. Now, the Justice Department is pushing back on behalf of Rosenstein in a new statement today, John, saying in part this: as the Deputy Attorney General previously stated, based on his personal dealings with the president, there was no basis to invoke the 25th Amendment, nor was the DAG, meaning Rosenstein, in a position to consider invoking the 25th Amendment. So they're not saying that it wasn't discussed, but it was never carried out. It was never serious. And they also underscore the fact that McCabe was removed from the investigation ultimately, and that he's been under investigation for lying to investigators. But as you mentioned, John, McCabe has kept notes.
And we will see as this drama continues to play out how those factor in. Laura Jarrett live at the Justice Department. Appreciate it. With me in studio to share their reporting and their insights, CNN's Abby Phillip. Politico's Eliana Johnson, CNN's Evan Perez, and Julie Hirschfeld Davis with the New York Times. I want to start with you because, again, there are credibility questions about two of the major players here, the President of the United States and Andrew McCabe. And it's also interesting, the Rosenstein statements are very lawyerly. He does not deny these conversations take place. He says Andy McCabe has some of the facts wrong, some of the memory wrong, and he says he was never going to invoke. That would be Jeff Sessions, not him. So Rosenstein's not saying this never happened. He's just saying McCabe's not getting it just right.
Well, yeah, he's saying essentially that we never actually went through with the 25th Amendment discussion, that he never approached anybody, including the Attorney General who's right upstairs from him, and that he never actually wore a wire or authorized anyone to wear a wire to record the president. I mean, it's still a very extraordinary thing to have happen. And one of the things that you have to underscore here, too, is that Andy McCabe is still under investigation. And so the idea that he's going out and telling these stories, some of which, it depends on how you read it. I mean, he had to get review from the Justice Department, from the FBI, in order to tell some of these stories. There are certain things he was not allowed to put in the book. Not clear whether he's sticking by all of that, whether his accounts to 60 Minutes, to CBS, is exactly along those lines. So he's still under criminal investigation. He is practically daring the Justice Department to charge him at this point. I mean, it's a very risky thing that he's doing. But, look, he's ripping the scab off of all of the stuff that the FBI was going through in early 2017. And we'll see, what Mueller tells us about whether Comey and McCabe were right to be suspicious of the president or not.
And to that point, the New York Times was first to report this. Other news organizations matched some of that reporting. But this is somebody on camera who was the number two and then the acting FBI director. And listen to your point here. Listen to how Andrew McCabe describes it. He says his boss gets fired. He meets with the president. He says his inkling is that something weird's happening here. And he worries the president of the United States might actually be taking actions on behalf of the Russian Federation.
I was speaking to the man who had just run for the presidency and won the election for the presidency, and who might have done so with the aid of the government of Russia, our most formidable adversary on the world stage. And that was something that troubled me greatly.
And so, like all of this is sort of in the eye of the beholder. If you're a Democratic Trump critic, you watch this and you say, there's a credible guy who was a law enforcement official, maybe wasn't always truthful about some other things, but here's a guy who knows the beat. He expands this counterintelligence investigation because he's worried about the president. If you're on Trump's side, you say, that's the deep state. That's the deep state right there. He has a meeting with the president, he doesn't like the way it goes, and he expands this investigation of the president.
Yeah, I think in so many ways, we know pretty clearly that in the first few months of this administration, the president's behavior was really alarming to a lot of people in his own government, that he was doing things and saying things that really set off alarm bells for a number of people. McCabe is not obviously the only person who's come out publicly and said that, but from President Trump's perspective, he's looking at this situation and he's seeing basically a conspiracy within the Department of Justice against him. And that's why he, for so long, didn't trust the people in that building. He harbored a lot of suspicion about people within his own government, and I think that persists to this day, although it has lessened in recent months. But you can see both sides of this story, but there's no question President Trump was doing things that caused a lot of people's concern, but at the same time you hear a lot of his allies saying he was doing those things because he didn't really understand how the government worked, that he didn't get what he was not supposed to do. I think the question for everyone now is, how much of a learning curve are you going to give the person who is the president of the United States, and for how long? And I think, it's not for me to say, but these are the facts that are out there. The president definitely did some things that caused concern, and his allies are basically saying, well, he just didn't know.
But to the point that Evan notes about ripping the scab off, we know this is the kind of stuff, and you can read it in the president's tweets today. This is what gets under his skin.
Absolutely. And as with many things, the president, he's completely transparent about what it is that bothers him about this. But I think the heart of the question gets to, was the FBI here exceeding the bounds of its authority and acting properly, whatever the political views of the people in that organization were? Is it in the FBI's rightful authority to open an investigation on a duly elected president? And if so, how should that investigation be conducted? And those questions I don't think have been settled yet, but certainly the Trump president has a presidency has opened them, and they're brand new questions that I don't think the country has grappled with. Probably a question that Congress will have to decide. How should the FBI handle an issue like this, or should it not handle an issue like this at all?
And we assume that the fact finder here who has the most credibility is Robert Mueller, himself a former FBI director. But we don't know how much of, if he goes through these questions and answers your question, was that a rightful escalation of the investigation? Who should we believe? Was the president just new on the job and thinking he could do whatever he wanted to and the lawyers were trying to push him back into the normal box? Or was the president trying to deliberately obstruct justice? If Mueller doesn't reach a conclusion that says the president did this and it's murky, we may not see it, right?
Right. I mean, we do know that Mueller has the information, excuse me, that we reported on last year about this memo and this conversation about the 25th Amendment, the reasons that McCabe says that he opened the counterintelligence investigation. But we don't know what the conclusion is going to be. Now, obviously, Mueller has a lot more context for this than any of us do, and probably than the White House does at this point, in terms of the visibility that he has into what was going on at that time, what the FBI knew, and what the other information was that had come to the fore. He's going to sort of put that together, you know, as a jigsaw puzzle, and I think the hope is that he comes out with something that's conclusive. But you're right, if he doesn't, what you have is this ironic situation where you have the president suspicious of his own government, believing that people are out to get him. And perversely, the fact that he thought that and that he acted in those ways actually furthered that very dynamic where you have McCabe saying, well, I just saw the president fire the FBI director. I better do something that absolutely solidifies this investigation that I think needs to go forward in case he does the same thing to me. So, you know, you have this push-pull that's essentially feeding on itself between a president who's suspicious of his own people and an FBI official who sees that could actually undermine the work of the government.
And as we saw from the Comey book rollout and other book rollouts, the president tracks these things. So today is day one. Today is day one as this plays out. More from the 60 Minutes interview. There are other interviews in the works. So we're opening, to your point, peeling a scab off, opening a new chapter, pick your term, strap in. It's going to be interesting. Up next for us here, Amazon dumps New York and says certain politicians are to blame.
Breaking news.
It's major breaking news today in the tech and business world. Amazon says it is now canceling plans to build a second headquarters in New York City. The company is blaming some local and state politicians. Let's get right to CNN's Christina Alessi in New York with the details. Another big deal.
That's right. Amazon is pulling out of its plan to build one of its headquarters here in New York in a statement basically blaming local and state politicians who were very vocally opposed to the deal. This is a huge blow to both the New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio and Governor Cuomo, who were arguing in favor of this in economic development. And the most controversial part of this deal were the tax incentives that the city was offering, $3 billion in total. And what the mayor and the governor were arguing was that $3 billion was well worth it because it would, Amazon being here in New York would generate at least $27 billion in revenue and bring the largest number of jobs in the state's history, 25,000 jobs at an average salary of $150,000. But still, there was a lot of opposition here in New York from state and local officials basically saying Amazon had not done enough. They wanted the company to really invest in transportation here, maybe alleviate some of the housing, the increasing housing costs. That was a real concern to the community. And look, being from New York and seeing how tech has impacted the city, a concern among young voters here has been whether or not New York would become the next San Francisco and be essentially too expensive for anyone young and starting out to be in this city. And you saw the way that voter frustration is really playing out in elections here in New York, resulting in Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez being elected. So, John, this is both a political and a business story. We'll have to see, what happens from here. But Amazon really making the decision for New York City.
It is a big one. Keep us posted, Christine, if there's more reaction from the mayor, from the governor as we go through this. Appreciate the reporting there. Matt Visor with the Washington Post joins us now, too. And this is going to be proof to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez that she's having success. This was before Amazon said last week it was reconsidering. So we don't have reaction yet from her. We're trying to get it to this decision. But here's what she said before when Amazon said it was reconsidering. I think it's really exciting. I think it's really encouraging to show that the government, all of us, primarily have a responsibility to communities that we directly impact, When we don't consult with those communities, we absolutely need to reconsider those deals and that process. So she's going to say this is a victory. Is it? Or will this, there's already been some Democrats who say maybe we need to find a primary challenger.
Well, I feel like what's interesting about this is that rather than initiating a process in which there was communication with Amazon about what more they can do, the process is over. I mean, Amazon is pulling out. There are going to be no concessions here for the community that she's concerned with. So I think you'll see a lot of people, even other Democratic politicians, saying, why throw the baby out with the bathwater, which is basically what has happened here. I think New York may have been able to get more out of Amazon, frankly, but Amazon has decided that the political opposition is just too much, and it's not worth getting hit on both sides now. This is now the second issue that they've been hit on from politicians on the left and on the right. It's a lot of incoming for this company.
There's also been, I think this clash probably between Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and what she represents, and Bill de Blasio and what he represents, and Andrew Cuomo, the governor. I think that clash between these Democrats is interesting right now, where so far it's been mostly theoretical, these debates. But this is very real, of losing jobs in a state and in a city that sets that up over corporate interests and over jobs and infrastructure in a city.
Yeah, I think this is the most visible result we've seen of the power of progressive politics on the national stage. And it is certainly something I think you'll see Republicans pointing to when they say, this talk sounds good. I think it'll be used in opposition to the Green New Deal. This talk sounds good. Here's a consequence of this. And it will be interesting to see what the Democratic response to that is, and how ably they're able to parry those sorts of Republican assaults.
And you mentioned the Republicans will take advantage. You see the tension within the Democratic Party over activism like this. And some of this plays out. Some of this is because it's a local concern versus a big state concern. Some of it's, she says, this is my neighborhood. Governor Cuomo says this is my state. But listen to the governor again. This is before the actual pullout decision. Amazon said it was reconsidering. Governor Cuomo said that's horrible.
There is no business that brings 25,000 jobs anymore. They don't exist. We need Amazon. They've opposed it. And you want to know how dangerous it is? There's a story today that says Amazon may not come to New York. If Amazon does not come to New York, it's because of the political opposition.
He calls it dangerous. He calls it dangerous. So here's a freshman congresswoman who stunned the world with her primary victory, who now is a congresswoman who has shown she is not afraid to stand her ground in these fights up against her governor, who thinks he's supposed to be the power in the state.
Right, and I think Eliana's right, but I don't think that the challenge is just going to come from Republicans. I think it's also clearly going to come from inside the Democratic Party. And let's not forget that the way that Ocasio-Cortez won her seat was by primarying a long-serving Democratic congressman who she painted as part of the business wing of the party, had lost touch with the values and the needs of working people in the district. We've heard this argument again and again from the progressives who have now won elections and are in the Democratic caucus on Capitol Hill. And I think we're going to continue to see this tension. This is just a concrete example where now the business wing folks can point to something and say, well, that's 25,000 jobs we didn't get. Now, I'm sure she will say, we were giving too much in the interest of sort of begging this company to come and establish a headquarters here. And her whole argument is, we don't need to beg for these jobs. We need to create a whole different kind of economy where we don't have to come with hat in hand, and we can have better jobs and better housing for people. But it's a very difficult argument to make in the abstract. This is a concrete case where it didn't work.
We'll watch it play out. The issues are different, but the activism of these new young Democratic members is very much like the activism of the new Tea Party members that we saw after the 2010, 2014 elections, causing fractures and tension within their own party. It's going to be fascinating to watch it play out. Up next, Congress prepares for a big vote on a long-awaited spending compromise. You know what day it is? Any romantic Valentine's Day plans lawmakers might have had in the works? Yeah, well, never mind.
Yeah, I had some other plans before this final agreement got reached, and now looks like I'll be spending the evening, from 6:30 to 9 o'clock tonight with my colleagues on the House floor. Where else would you rather spend Valentine's Day?
Republicans were outplayed in negotiating the new spending bill, which Congress will vote on today. Sources telling CNN the president, who, as we all know, fashions himself as a big deal maker, is wondering why he wasn't consulted more. The bill, here you go, good It's not even all of it. I left a few pages on the desk. 1,169 pages long. Requires everyone, Democrats, Republicans, and the White House, to hold their nose a little bit. It falls, for example, way short of the president's demand for $5.7 billion in new border wall funding. There's no extension of the Violence Against Women Act or back pay for federal contractors, both of those Democratic priorities. The Senate, then the House, are expected to vote on the deal later today. Republicans know the president is mad because he's getting so little of what he demanded when he shut down the government back in December. So as they discuss this compromise, they're trying to spin it as progress.
A government shutdown's never going to help. It hurts people. So maybe burned once here badly, I believe, led us to, I think, a very good compromise that, again, gives the president the ability to move forward with the plan that the professionals have told us they want and need at the border.
CNN's Phil Mattingly live on Capitol Hill doing the math today. That's interesting how the senator put it, Phil, with the plan the professionals tell us they want and need at the border. What the professionals say is different from what the president says.
Yeah, and look, I think what you've seen both publicly and what I've been told privately from Republican senators is trying to message this in the best way possible. In other words, with Shelley Moore Capito, who's the chairman of the Appropriations Subcommittee on Homeland Security, is basically referring to when they receive private briefings from professional staff from Department of Homeland Security in terms of what they actually wanted. You're also hearing Senator Richard Shelby, the top member of the Appropriations Committee, the top Republican negotiator here, talking about how this serves as a down payment. This is a broader concept. Multiple senators saying if the president wants to act unilaterally on his own, go ahead, do it. It's part of the process. What you're hearing right now is an effort to message directly to the president that this is part of the process. It's a win, at least in the near term, and it gives you space to do more afterwards. The reason why they're doing that, well, you played the sound at the beginning of the show. Both Shelby talking about how he was praying right now for a resolution, Senator Chuck Grassley on the Senate floor talking about he's praying that the president will come to a resolution. I'm told that the Republicans here have not received an explicit assurance that the president will support the bill. They're still waiting to see. We got a rather cryptic tweet from the president that was deleted that said simply funding bill, which, you know, after 9 weeks of this, let's go. Okay, that's fine. Wait, I don't know what it means. I'm sure somebody at the panel might have a better idea than what I do. But I think the bottom line here is on Capitol Hill, in Congress, both the House and the Senate, both parties are confident they will have the votes to pass this. The wild card remains, as it has always been, where the president is going to be on this. That will likely determine how big the vote is. But make no mistake, the Senate is going to move this afternoon. The House will follow suit. Both sides feel comfortable with where they are on the vote counts. They just want to know where the president actually stands on the, to quote the president, funding bill.
All right, Phil, between counting votes, you can join that tour that just went by behind you as well. I hope Mrs. Mattingly expects you home for a late dinner. You better get there. Let's bring the conversation in the studio. The president, to Phil's point, the president tweeted funding bill. Then we all didn't know what that meant. He deleted it and deleted it. Then a follow-up tweet saying he's considering the funding bill right now, looking it over with his team at the White House. I just want to point out, in case you're watching, it's page 33 is one of the issues for the president, in which it talks about, number one, the number for barrier spending is way below what the president wanted. Number two, it talks about on page 33 that the money can only go to the existing structures like the existing structures. So we've seen those Trump prototypes out in the desert. The law specifically says no. Whatever new things you build have to copy what is already on the border. That's not what the president wants.
No, I mean, it is clearly not for his wall. None of this money is for the wall that he has asked for. And that language has been in appropriations bills that the Republican Congress passed for 2 years, for the first 2 years of his presidency. And that's what got him so angry. That's what ultimately led him to shut down the government at the end of last year and to engage in this fight. The amount there is obviously not only less than what he asked for, but less than the deal that Vice President Pence then offered up as a way to get them out of the shutdown in the first sense. So they have backslid a lot in these negotiations, even in border security funding. But what's amazing to me now is we're in this phase of, where the president really likes to build up the anticipation of, like, is he going to sign it? Is he not going to sign it? Even when he's made these decisions, a lot of the time he likes to keep up this suspense, which we saw with this tweet. I'm reviewing the bill. It's not like I'm going to sign the bill. I'm reviewing the bill. That gives Republicans fits. But in a situation like this one, where he is so unhappy with the result, that is the only thing that he has to hold on to sort of keep people in suspense about whether he's even willing to accept this thing up until the last second.
But even still, I think there is a sense, both within the White House and outside of the White House, that the suspense is kind of real. I mean, he has really put them into tough spots before. I mean, everybody remembers the omnibus bill that he literally almost did not sign up until the last very second, giving people on the Hill a heart attack, and had to be talked out of not signing that bill. And I think there's always a possibility with Trump that at the very last moment he can decide that he is going to go the path that literally no one else wants to go down, and walk out of the room as a negotiating tactic. So, you know, our sources have told us that he is likely to do it, but no one is willing to go out on a limb over this one. And President Trump really does not like this bill. He's not really one for details, but this is going to be about whether or not he feels like the politics of the situation is one that he can sell to his people. And he may not know that until he's up at that point where he has to make a final decision.
And he's not one for details, but this is a situation where some of his supporters are likely to seize on a detail in this bill and say, this is terrible. This is a place where the president really got rolled by Democrats. And so he is going to be paying attention to what the nuances in this bill are. And as far as the president's position has evolved over the past year, last March he had an opportunity to exchange $25 billion for his wall for citizenship for DACA recipients. He said no to that. He then had an opportunity to accept $1.6 billion for the wall. He said no to that. And so here we are at $1.3 billion. And so we've gradually seen the number the president's talking about diminish over the past year. And he said after he signed that omnibus bill that he was never going to sign a bill he hadn't read before that was crafted overnight. Well, that bill is sitting right there. He's in the same position again. So I don't think we've seen the president's position improve over the past 12 months.
No, that's a great way to put it. The president's position this is much less than he could have had, much less than he could have had, and yet the expectation is he will sign it, but you're going to hold out the idea that until we see the signature.
I think there's a reason that no one is willing to say that he will sign it.
Well, he cares about winning and he cares about his base, and both of those things are in jeopardy with this bill. And I think his ability to sell it is strained because of the very thing Eliana was laying out. And I do think that there's this question of, we talked about this off camera, but why don't they just take, Valentine's Day off? Why do they need to vote so quickly? And it's because there is real apprehension that we've got to go ahead and do this. We've got to convince the president to just sign this and let's move on to the next thing.
He's a yes at the moment. Let's get it to him while he's a yes. Which is another reason Mitch McConnell wants a huge vote in the Senate. He wants a huge vote in the Senate, not only to send a message to the House, but to send a message to the president that there's no appetite for another shutdown, sir. Eat your peas, sign the bill. Okay. But we shall see. Up next, France, Germany, and the United Kingdom under fire in public from the Vice President of the United States. Right now, on whether to make William Barr the next Attorney General of the United States. Barr held that post in the early 90s during the George H.W. Bush administration. He was nominated by President Trump last year to replace Jeff Sessions. Senate Democrats have been skeptical of how Barr will handle the upcoming conclusion of the Russia Special Counsel investigation. Michael Bloomberg taking a wait-and-see approach on his decision on whether to run for president. People close to the former New York City mayor say he'll wait until March at the earliest before announcing whether he'll join the growing field of Democratic candidates. He also reportedly wants to put some space between other candidates' announcements and his own if he does decide to enter the race. Senator Chuck Schumer firing back at the Majority Leader Mitch McConnell's push for a vote on the Democrats' Green New Deal. That ambitious climate change plan has been ridiculed by many conservatives. Schumer and other Democrats see McConnell's move to bring it to the Senate floor as a stunt aimed at embarrassing them. But Schumer says, bring it on. Welcome the vote.
The Republican leader says he wants to bring the Green New Deal resolution up for a vote. I say, go for it. Bring it on. Trust me, we'll be fine.
And a stunning rebuke of some of America's closest allies today by the Vice President of the United States. At a Mideast conference in Poland, Vice President Mike Pence urging the European Union to take a tougher stand against Iran and for countries there to pull out of the Iran nuclear deal. He essentially accused America's friends of helping America's enemy.
Just 2 weeks ago, Germany, France, and the United Kingdom announced the creation of a special financing mechanism designed to oversee a mirror image transaction that would replace sanctionable international payments between EU businesses and Iran. They call this scheme a special purpose vehicle. We call it an effort to break American sanctions against Iran's murderous revolutionary regime. It's an ill-advised step. that will only strengthen Iran, weaken the EU, and create still more distance between Europe and the United States.
We know the administration not happy about this, but that is remarkable. It is not every day you see the Vice President of the United States travel to Europe on European soil and call out American allies by name, and not just say that we don't like what they're doing, but we think it's essentially aiding and abetting the enemy.
And also to explicitly say that there is a gap between the United States and the European Union that is growing is, I think, really extraordinary. Usually American presidents go to Europe to say that this is a bond that can't be broken, right, for geopolitical reasons. And Pence is saying the exact opposite of that. But, you know, the United States is still kind of on an island here on this Iran nuclear deal. The Europeans are basically saying, look, we don't like everything Iran is doing, but we laid out this deal, what they need to be doing, and we do not think that they're breaking it. And by the way, the United States' intelligence community agrees with that assessment. So Pence is delivering President Trump's message, but he's not really doing much to convince the Europeans of something that not even his own intelligence committee believes to be true.
Language is pretty tough. A scheme.
And it shows just how disruptive, again, that the Trump White House has been on international issues. As Abby's pointing out, the Iran nuclear deal was something that brought the world together. Same with the Paris Climate Change Agreement. And it's always interesting seeing that on vivid display, the rupture between the United States and Europe as they try to proceed on this.
Right, and that, like, far from trying to actually bring anyone back together after all of the steps that they've made, including on the Iran deal in Paris and you know, even on NATO, to try to repair some of those breaches, they're actively sort of exacerbating the divide there and making it very clear to the world that there is a divide and that is that's okay with them, that is sort of that's the framework from which we're operating now as the United States, and it is pretty striking.
I think that's a great way to put it. It's almost a badge of honor to them to be fighting the Europeans so publicly. It's remarkable. All right, next for us, a sad twist here, remembering the lives lost in Parkland, Florida, and a look at where the gun control debate stands 1 year later. A somber anniversary today in Parkland, Florida, where 1 year ago today, a student opened fire with a semi-automatic rifle. And in just 6 minutes and 20 seconds, 14 students and 3 staff members were killed. One of those students, Nicholas Dworet, had just received a full scholarship to swim at the University of Indianapolis. CNN spoke with his friend, Spencer Bloom, this morning.
Right now, Nick should be diving into 6 feet underwater to practice swimming for the Olympics, the 2020 Olympics. Instead, he's 6 feet underground. There's nothing that can be done to change that. You know, Carmen Shenchup should be decorating her dorm right now. Jamie should be dancing, you know, and Nick should be swimming. These people were these kids and were our friends.
These kids were our friends. President Trump marking the day in a statement that included, quote, "We will not rest until our schools are secure and our communities are safe." The biggest difference 1 year later here in Washington is that Democrats do now control the House, and they say they're ready to move and are already moving on some new gun control proposals. But most of those proposals have zero chance of becoming law because of the Republican Senate and the president's position. So first and foremost, as you watch the moment of silence and you hear again from the survivors in Parkland, your heart just stops sometimes because their stories and their memories are heartbreaking. Has anything changed here at all? We do know the president right after the shooting talked about raising the age for gun purchases, talked about banning bump stocks, talked about very strong background checks. The administration, after months, did go through with the bump stock. On the other issues, he pulled back. Democrats say they're going to pass some things, but they're not going to get anywhere out of the House, are they?
I don't think much has changed on the national level in terms of the political divide or the conversation, really. I do think things have changed at the state level, particularly in Florida, where even though they have a Republican governor, the politics of it are different. We saw their previous governor, Rick Scott, change the tenor of the way he was talking about this and run successfully a Republican candidate as a Republican candidate for the Senate. So he's now Senator Rick Scott. So I do think Florida has changed, and perhaps some other states, the way Republicans are talking about this. But on the national level, I don't think it's had a real impact.
To that point, I just want to show Florida was among them. 26 states passed 67 gun safety laws in 2018. You see those states there. And they're a mix of red states and blue states. If you think of this as a presidential map, it's a mix. Florida and Louisiana among the two red states where they passed some new gun safety laws, and you see the others. Obviously, when there's a tragedy like this, the country has a moment. And then as time passes, opinions sometimes change. The president would be a prime example in this case, what he said in the days after and where he is now. This is the NPR PBS Marist poll. Gun sales should be more strict. Right after Parkland, 71%. A year later, that number down to 51%.
Well, I do think we should give these kids at Parkland a lot of credit for really being bold and not backing down, even in their grief, from whatever they wanted to do. And we saw it on both sides of the issue. There were some students who were part of these marches in favor of more gun control. Other students were trying to have a slightly different conversation, more like the one that the president wanted to have, perhaps about arming teachers or resource officers within a school. But this is one of those rare times when really an immeasurable tragedy like this has actually produced a group of people who were a part of the tragedy wanting to be engaged in the political process. And I don't think the story is really over yet. Over time, these views do kind of diminish, and they go back to the average, what we've seen over the years of 51%. But I think we can't really call this a done deal. I think for the first time, we're seeing a group of people who are really in it for the long haul, trying to push maybe the Democratic Party first forward, but perhaps the rest of the country.
I think it's a great point. Whatever your views, whether you agree or disagree with the specifics being advocated by some of these Parkland students and survivors, their activism is remarkable. And wherever you are on the issues, that's the way to do it. Get involved in everything. Will anything change in the context of, if you do look at the Democratic presidential field? A lot of these Democrats say that, especially because of the 2018 House wins in the suburbs with younger voters, that they feel more comfortable talking about this issue on a national platform like a presidential race, which for years the Democrats pulled back from when it came to the presidency, because you look at the Trump map, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, it's risky.
Yeah, and I do think that it will become a point of debate among the Democratic Party, and you're seeing the House lead the way a little bit on having hearings, having the first hearing since 2007 on gun safety issues. And so I do think that Democrats in the presidential field will follow that. But as you mentioned, a year since Parkland, it's been, I think, 6 years since Newtown, which triggered a similar amount of political activism and an attempt to, and yet at the federal level, there's been nothing done. So I do think maybe there's a presidential type debate that elevates the issue and kind of changes the national discussion. But, any sign of light at the end of the tunnel for activists on this, is pretty dim.
Well, and I think it's going to be difficult for the Democratic presidential candidates to avoid this, because the House is moving forward with some legislation. They just passed the universal background checks legislation out of committee. They're going to put it on the floor eventually, and then probably lob it